The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.
Welcome to the Instructor Podcast. This is a show that helps you become an even more awesome driving instructor and run a better driving business. As always, I am your jolly northern host, Terry Cook. I'm delighted to be here, but even more delighted that you have chosen to listen, because we are back with the second episode of Season 8, and I'm delighted to announce that Bright Coaching have opted to continue their sponsorship throughout Season 8. So to find out more about what Bright Coaching have to offer, including the new online cohort, head over to thebrightcoaching.net, or you can find them at the Intelligent Instructor and ADI NJC Expo in Newark on September the 29th. Now, speaking of the Expo, it's a great place for ADIs and PDIs to get some wonderful CPD, but it's also a great opportunity for anyone considering coming into the industry. And that's the main focus of today's episode, how we broke into the industry and how others can learn from our mistakes. We also talk around the pink license, how we use it, all that kind of stuff. But just before we dive in, I'd like to point you in the direction of the Instructor Podcast website, where you can get access to the entire back catalogue of episodes, all of our free resources, and find out more about the Instructor membership. Head to www.theinstructorpodcast.com. But for now, let's get stuck into the show. So today on the Instructor Podcast, I'm delighted to be joined once again by Laura Morris. How are we doing, Laura?
Hey, I'm great, thank you.
Excellent. Well, wonderful to have you again, because today we are talking about entering the industry, how we joined it, our thoughts on how other people joined, and all that kind of stuff. So let's start with you today. Entering the industry, how did you get into this wonderful world that we're in?
Do you know what? It was never ever something I considered. I had a very different job before, which I'm sure we'll talk about previous jobs soon, but I got with my partner, who is obviously now my husband, and he was a driving instructor already. And I thought, I'll give it a bash. I'll give it a go, and naturally just fell into it. I mean, the original or initial process of training and qualifying was a nightmare. I struggled with that, and I think that was more down to poor training and not getting the right training in the first place. And it was only when Lou Walsh, as I'm sure many of you know, she kind of picked me up, took me under her wing, she sorted me out, and I passed my third attempt on my Part 3. And I then found it naturally quite easy once I had the right support behind me, when I had someone who believed in me and who made it all make sense for me. But it was never something I intended to do, but naturally I've fallen into it quite easily and ran with it, and I've been doing it for 7 or 8 years now. So,
was it the old style PSTs, or was it the...
I actually qualified. When I qualified, the Part 2 had just literally changed a couple of months before, and the PSTs had also just stopped. I think it was the year before. So I was very lucky I did it on the very edge. So I never had to do any training for the old style PSTs. However, in a way that was a disadvantage, because I had trainers who were very competent in PSTs and PST training, but then because it had just switched over to the current format of the Part 3, they weren't then so clued up maybe, and I'm not going to say not as knowledgeable. They definitely had the knowledge, but maybe just weren't making it make sense for me in the right way at the right time, because their skills and expertise were PST based rather than the current Part 3 formats, if that makes sense. It was kind of I didn't do any training for the old PSTs because it was right on the kind of cuff. So all my training was supposedly the new style way, but the trainers themselves were not quite in touch with the new style.
I'm with you. So when did you qualify?
I actually qualified on New Year's Eve, 31st of December 2018. then obviously my training was the year before that, so in the previous year.
I qualified in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
It was August. I want to say August the 18th. So it's interesting we qualified that close together because we have taken very, very different routes. So I took the old-style PSTs.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember my trainer telling me that the people he'd just started training, so I was taking my part 3 and he'd just started training new people and he was training them for the new style stuff. I don't know what we call it. And he was saying how he was finding that difficult because that transition, but he'd not really got the relevant training himself to do that. But it's interesting because for me, I'd say learnt the old PSTs and then 6 months later got a standards check in the new style. And that was really interesting. So, do you know what? I'd be interested in your thoughts on my experience there, because I failed my first attempt at the part 3 abysmally. I got a 1 and a 2, right? And I probably shouldn't say this, but it happened, so I'll repeat it. But my trainer sat in the back on mine, and my first attempt, and when I failed, before I'd failed, we finished up, and off she goes, coming in 10 minutes. I looked at my trainer, he went, "You know you failed, don't you?" And I went, "Yeah." And I thought, what if I didn't know? Nice way to tell me.
Kind comment.
Yeah. But I was abysmal. Everything just went to pieces. From the start, she said, "Hiya, Terry. My name's Julie." Oh, no, she said, "Just call me Julie for today." So I said, "Hiya, Terry. I'm Julie." That's how nervous I was. And it went downhill from there. And I was just abysmal. And on my second attempt, I completely changed my mindset. I went in almost not caring if I passed or failed. I'd created a plan B, and it was just like, okay, if I fail, I'll do this. And I was actually really excited about my plan. I preferred my failing option to my passing option. But my trainer couldn't sit with me, so I went by myself. Different examiner. Now, I never, ever blame the examiner, but she did put me more at ease. And I remember the first one, she was talking about the test on the way to the car. The second one spoke about everything except the test on the way to the car. And I just relaxed more. But so my first attempt at part 3, I got a 1 and a 2. My second attempt, I got a 5 and a 6. Then I went to my standards check, just scraped a pass. And I can remember being really proud because I'd had to, obviously, in those 6 months, completely change what I'd done.
Just for the audience who are listening, who are PDIs more so, do you want to just explain what PSTs are?
Preset tests, I think it was called, wasn't it? Preset tests. So basically, you would have an examiner pretend to be a student. Now, I should clarify, you know they're an examiner. They're not just turning up from, like, what do they call them at the restaurants? Mystery shoppers. It's not a mystery shopper. You would go to the test and the examiner would come out, I'd have a chat, and they would role play a student, and you would have to role play a lesson as their instructor. And I think it was like 20 minutes, and then you'd have a 2-minute break, and then you'd do another 20-minute one, and they'd tell you what you were doing. So you're going to teach me this today. Might be misremembering some of this, but you're going to teach me this today. And then you'd have to dig in to find out a bit about this character that they play in, and then go and try and teach them. And it was horrible because you weren't being an instructor. I mean, you were, but it didn't feel right to me. It didn't sit right. But that was it. So you'd have like a 50-minute test and on 2 different things, and they would that was the other thing. The second part of the test, they would role play a different student. So the first half, they would role play Trevor, who couldn't use his clutch very well. The second half, they would role play Phyllis, who couldn't do right turns, and you had to go and practice them. So that was fun.
So then, do you feel that when you took your standards check 6 months later, so again, for PDIs who maybe aren't aware, when you qualify, you're supposed to have a standards check again within 6 to 12 months of qualifying, which at the moment doesn't always happen because of backlogs and everything else. And we've got the trigger system now, which is another story. But at the time, you had to take another standards check within 6 to 12 months of qualifying. Do you think you were at a disadvantage because you were then doing a standards check, which by then had changed in the style and format?
I don't know if I was at a disadvantage or an advantage or what, but I knew it was coming in. My trainer had told me about it. I don't think I'd quite clicked that I would get a standards check that soon. I think my kind of mindset was, right, I've qualified. I'm going to take a few months just to relax into the job, kind of ease into the job. And I wasn't stepping away from all training and CPD and that stuff, but it was like, I'm not putting any pressure on myself for a few months. I'm just going to relax and ease back into it. And that didn't work because I relaxed and eased into it, and then I got a letter for a standards check. So the disadvantage was that I'd been trained one way, and now I had to go and deliver a lesson in be assessed on something different. The advantage was that I was very fresh. You know, I'd spent, I don't know, 9 months or whatever it was training, so it wasn't undoing years. So there were some people that had been doing the way they're instructing for 10 years and now having to completely change what they've done. I'm just having to go back 6 or 9 months and tweak it a little bit. And the interesting thing for me was that I was already incorporating parts of it in my lessons without realizing. You know, I'd be often asking students what they wanted to do that day. I'd often be saying, you know, I can remember like end at lesson, you know, do you want to park facing? Do you want to turn it round? Do you want to reverse round corner? You know, just like little things like this, which you wouldn't be doing on the old PSTs, but I was just incorporating into my lessons and a bit more coachy, just because that's who I am naturally. So that did help me. I could see why it would be a disadvantage for some and an advantage for others, but I think I just accepted it for what it was.
I like that. And I think we have, so for any of you guys who don't know, we have the PDI group, Blues PDI group, who supports any PDI, regardless of who they're training with. But when they qualify, we kick them out of the PDI group. And we have a green group where it's only for graduates from the PDI group, but it's another lovely group where they can get support. But in there, we quite often see first attempt standards checks from when they've qualified where they fail, because quite often they pass their part 3 and they forget about all their training. They're thinking, well, I've qualified, it's okay. And all the training just stops. And sometimes they don't keep that up. So that can be a bit of a sticking point.
It's interesting you say that, because I've spoke a little bit about this recently about how I've been a bit disappointed in that I've had PDI sign up to my instructor premium membership, and then they qualify and they leave like a week later. And I do just wonder how much of it is that, oh, I've qualified now, I don't need to do anything else. And I mean, look, things change. Look at mine. You know, mine changed. I had to completely change what I was doing. If I'd been part of Go Green or the Instructor Podcast Premium or whatever it is, I would have had a better idea of that. But not just that, just the idea of developing. But maybe we'll come back to that a bit more later on. But I will just say actually that I was really, really nervous about my standards check. I was less nervous on my old PSTs because I mean, the first one I was atrocious, but you know, whatever. But because I was interacting with the examiner, I didn't get the same nerves. But on a standards check, when I've got the examiner sat in the back watching me, I find I actually get more nervous. But I will just say, I'll be honest about this. Like I say, for my first attempt at part 3, I got a 1 and a 2. And I remember my trainer told me they don't give 1s out. I'm like, yeah, I can imagine. But then, to be fair to him, when I got the 5 and a 6, he went, they don't give 6s out. I'm like, okay, cool. One extreme to other. But then I literally just scraped a pass on my standards check, which was all I wanted. Going from that, then PST to standards check, all I cared about at that point was passing. And then my mentality was, right, now I'm going to build on this. But purely for humour's sake, I'm going to mention, I've said it before, but there'll be people that will have heard it. The examiner that passed me, she gave me the worst pass ever. She said, on this occasion, you haven't failed. Like, what a horrible thing to say. I just heard the word fail and she starts wittering on about something. I think she was complaining about eye mirrors and I need an iPad, not a phone or something like that. I don't know. But I was just like, I heard the word fail. And she carried on and went, hold on. Have I passed? And she went, yeah, I said that. I'm like, no, you didn't. You didn't say I'd passed. You said I hadn't failed. This is, what horrible. What? I'm right. What a horrible way to pass someone.
It's not the normal bedside manner that I'd expect from an examiner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do want to touch back because, like, you said you initially struggled with your training, then you discovered the loo. So I'm not asking you to drop anyone in it, but what was it that you found difficult with? Was it you found it difficult? Was it their training wasn't very good, or was it a combination of the two, or was it just a mismatch? Or
I think it was probably a combination of the two. And the trainers, I had two trainers. So from the beginning, I decided I wanted to become an instructor. I thought, I'll give it a go, see what happens. And then, so my husband was already an instructor, and he said, by all means, go for it. But he was happy enough to recognize that while he's a good instructor and he had years of experience already, he's not a trainer. And he didn't feel like he had the expertise to train me. So he said, by all means, go for it. I'll support you. But you need to find a trainer and let's find someone. So I initially had a trainer, and I found that I was still lacking some knowledge, lacking something. There was missing gaps in my training, missing gaps in my knowledge, my practical skills. And it was a bit all over the place. But at the time I had nothing to compare it to. So I thought I was doing okay. And then it's quite often we hear this with PDIs, is that until someone tells you you failed a part 3, of course you're going to think you're doing okay, because no one's there to tell you otherwise. Unless you've got a really good trainer who knows what they're doing and they're confident and they're happy to say, look, this needs changing, this needs fixing, let's improve this. If you've got a trainer who's saying you're good, and then you get to your part 3 and an examiner says, actually, you failed quite badly, it's a bit of a wake-up call. So I had that wake-up call, and I thought, okay, failed my first attempt at part 3. I'm going to find another trainer. I've had another local trainer who, again, like, I'm not dropping anyone in it at all. I just think that, again, I was still missing information, still missing gaps in my training. The availability of the training maybe wasn't always there, so I just felt like I was left alone a little bit. And I took another attempt at my part 3 after being told that I'd be okay, and I failed again with an even worse score. And that was a bit like, okay, crap. What am I supposed to do now? And again, that's also another common thing that we see with PDIs. Their second attempt part 3 score is often worse, partly because they do a first attempt and then they fail. And then they think, it's okay, I know what I did wrong, I'm just going to change that and I'll be okay for my second attempt. Now, examiners are not trainers, and they're not allowed to be trainers. You fail an attempt and the examiner will just tell you factually what went wrong. They're not allowed to say what you should have done. They're not really allowed to say, or give any sort of training information. And quite often they'll focus on one or two bigger issues. But quite often, if you failed with a score of 25, 27, 20, whatever it is, that's not just failing by 1 or 2 points or 3 points. You're failing by a lot of points. You've got 51 points. And if you're getting 25 or 29, whatever, you're missing a lot of points. So even though the examiner says, let's say, Terry, you failed, you over-instructed, go away, get some training. Terry, you're going to go away and think, okay, I over-instructed. I know what I did wrong. I'm going to go back again and I'm not going to over-instruct. Then you're going to take a second attempt. You're going to under-instruct next time because you're going to try and do it too much the opposite way. And also potentially you're not going to pick up on the lots of smaller issues that also lost you points in the first place. So I think we quite often see PDIs with a lower second attempt fail, a lower score on their second attempt, because they think they know where they went wrong and they try and reverse that, and it doesn't always work in their favor. So I definitely think getting some really good, decent, solid training and not rushing into a second attempt is really important.
Just to interrupt there, because I'm interested, it's interesting what you said. Do you think that me getting pretty much at the lowest score you can get actually did me a favour? Because I couldn't get any worse in theory.
Quite possibly. I think there's something you said earlier. So I think partly, you were kind of at the point where it couldn't have been much worse than what you already were. And also that was probably a wake-up call for you. You got some training, you did what you needed to do, you bounced back. And I think also part of possibly what, obviously, I don't know the whole situation, but you said that you'd already made a plan B. You'd already decided that if this wasn't going to work, you had a plan. And actually, when you take away the pressure and the stress of it, quite often when it's like a pupil, when they think they've already failed their driving test, they then relax and the rest of the drive is actually pretty good. And it could well have possibly been similar for yourself when you had another plan, you had another option that if this didn't work out, it wasn't the end of the world. So that also could have played a factor.
It definitely did. And it's what I recommend to PDIs or people with standards check that come to me. It's one of the first things I say, get a backup plan. And I know different things work for different people. You know, there will be some people that say, there is no backup plan. This is it. And fair enough, if that works for you, then fine. But I know how much more comfortable I felt on that second attempt, knowing that, well, if it goes wrong, this is what I'm going to do to get to my third. And I can't remember what it was, but it was genuinely really exciting. But I mean, just on that, you got to your third attempt. What's the pressure like on that third attempt?
It can either be one of two pressures. It could either be a massive pressure where you've got family to feed, you've got kids, this is your only job. Maybe you potentially quit your normal job to go on pink license full time. And that's sometimes a disadvantage of going on pink, and we'll come on to that in a bit. But sometimes people quit their jobs to go on a pink. And then if you fail 3 times, or if your part 1 expires, your theory expires after the 2 years, you might only get maybe even 1 or 2 attempts at the moment because of the test dates and the lack of test dates and availability. You know, if you then fail and you have to go around again, you've then got no job. So you could end up with family to feed, no job, bills to pay, a house to keep over your head. And even if you haven't got a family, you've still got bills to pay, you've still got to live, you still need to feed yourself. That pressure is enormous. But then some people are in a position, I've got a couple of PDIs at the moment that are in this position, and I was in this position on my third attempt where I was with my husband. He was stable financially, he was working, and yes, we had children. We got 3 children between us. But actually, if I failed a third attempt, it wasn't the end of the world. The job that I used to have was a pretty easy, in-demand job. It wasn't going to be difficult to find another job. Whereas some people give up really high-paid managerial positions, which, if you failed, how easy would it be to get back into that sort of job? If you, let's say, I don't want to phrase this the wrong way and offend anyone. If you had a more of a common job like retail assistant or something, and you gave up that job, it's going to be fairly easy to get back into that line of work because they're always in demand because, it's a sought after job. But I think the position that I was in was that financially we were going to be okay for a little while if I failed my third attempt. Kids and everything, it was going to be okay until I got another job. So I would say that I was the opposite pressure. I had no pressure as such. If I failed, I failed. And I will never forget saying to people around me at the time that it's New Year's Eve and it's my third attempt. And if I failed, I was going to be getting drunk anyway. And if I passed, I was going to be getting drunk anyway.
Plan B.
So, yeah, literally. So I think a bit like yourself, I was a bit more relaxed. I was a bit more like, it is what it is. Let's just go and do it. And felt a little bit more confident because I'd spent a lot of time with Lou and getting her support and input and training. And I felt like someone believed in me. So I felt like, okay, I can do this. I've got a good chance. Yeah.
I was going to ask you a little bit about Lou, actually, because please tell me if this is the wrong phrase to use, but sometimes reluctant to put people on a pedestal. But I also know the regard that Lou was held in. So was that the biggest difference when you went to, because you described it as a taking you under a wing, and like you just said, it felt like someone believed in you. Was that the biggest difference, that someone believed in you?
I think so. And that could have been any trainer. And I think any trainer could have picked me up, taken me under their wing. I think with Lou, it was different because Lou's input didn't just stop there. I'm sure we'll come on to this later, but Lou's input lasted throughout my whole career. So, and still does have a big impact on my career now. But if you have a trainer who genuinely believes in you and is happy to support you, and just knowing that you can genuinely trust what they say and they're making it make sense for you, they're making it all easy to understand. That's the important thing, is whatever you do in terms of training, it's got to work for you. If it doesn't work for you or doesn't make sense to you, then find someone who makes it make sense. It's as simple as that in a way.
Do you know what? We could have spoken about this on another episode, actually, but that ties into a little bit of what I do on the podcast. The big thing I say is find the one that works for you. Doesn't mean you can't follow more people. Doesn't mean you can't get ideas, but get one person that you latch onto. And any PDIs, ADIs, whatever, listening, get one person. I'd advise it's not me. Get one person, latch onto that person, but get ideas from elsewhere, but have that person you keep coming back to. I think that's a good way to it. But I also want to touch back on the pink license, because you said you were on a pink. I wasn't a pink, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how mine worked, because I do have quite, I think, strong views on this and potentially wrong views. I don't know. But I was a professional gambler at the time I was on my pink license. But when I first joined, I started doing a stupid number of hours. I was doing 40 to 50 hours a week on that pink license. And it didn't take me long to realize that I wasn't really learning. I was getting better through just repetition rather than actual practice. And I cottoned on to that quite quick. And I soon, maybe not the most professional of means, reduced my hours. A few students that didn't stay with me for as long as perhaps I might have liked to. But it was my pink license. It was my job. I prioritized me at that point, and I got my hours down to, I can't remember what I got them down to, but got down to so that I could do my lessons, take time in between them to reflect on them, plan for the next one, and still have time to learn and watch videos and read books and stuff outside of that as well. Because that pink license for me was well, say never. Initially, it was about earning, but pretty soon clicked on, I don't want to earn from this. I'm going to use the earning as a bonus because I've got my professional gambling, and I'm going to use this to learn. And I was like a proper little self-critique after every lesson. Is that, from your opinion, the way that we should be using a pink license?
In terms of...
We should be using it to learn, not to cram in as many hours as we can. And we're just taking a brief pause to give a shout out to some of the latest premium members, and they are Simon Watt, Craig Elliott, and Steve Locke. These folks have decided to upgrade their CPD and get immediate access to some of the best training and development resources available to ADIs and PDIs, including training things on like coaching, mindfulness, mental health, and the standards check. They also get access to some of the best minds in the industry, like Bob Morton, Emma Cottington, Ray Seagrave, and Tom Stenson. Plus, they even get some more from me, but don't let that put you off. To find out more, or to sign up for a 3 weeks trial, head to theinstructorpodcast.com or use the link in the show notes. And I also want to take a moment to point you in the direction of Bright Coaching, who recently announced a new online version of their accredited qualification in coaching, behavioural change, and driver psychology. The first online cohort kicks off on October the 31st, making this year's Halloween extra special. To find out more or to sign up to the newsletter, head to brightcoaching.net. But for now, let's get stuck back into the show.
I think that there are PDIs out there who, rightly or wrongly, use it to earn money. But I think that pressure is also put on you if you've potentially quit a previous job that you had. I think it's also really important that, to echo everything you just said about making sure you've got time to have breaks between lessons, to reflect on your lessons, to plan the next lesson, to look at a potential practice area or a route or something you want to take. Because also, if you're working in an area that's not quite familiar to you, you might want to just double check the area, make sure there's no hidden surprises or roadworks that have popped up that might impact your route. I think also, and I'm not 100% not dissing any different routes or anything into the industry, but if you are on a franchise, potentially with one of the bigger franchises out there, you potentially are paying a lot of money per week, and then you feel compelled to go out and earn more, and you have to work more to earn more to pay the franchise fees. Now, don't get me wrong, there are pros and cons to going on franchises, and it does work for some people, and you get, the car supplied, the insurance supplied, and everything like that. There are definitely pros and cons, but those who are in franchises sometimes feel compelled to do more hours to make up for the fact they've got higher franchise fees to pay. It's always a consideration as well. You said about the way you did it was you started off doing 40, 50 hours a week, and then you had to kind of work it backwards and try and whittle that down. And then you had to maybe try and get rid of some pupils. I would always recommend doing the absolute opposite for understandable reasons. And also, so let's take my best mate. I know he'll be okay with me talking about him. His name's Jake. He's lovely. He's been my best mate for a good few years. And for ages, I was trying to convince him to become an instructor. When he eventually started training and went on to a pink, we started off for the first week, he did, I think, 5 or so hours. The second week, he did 10 or 15 hours. And the third week, and we sort of built it up slowly. Because that way, if he got to a point where he thought, okay, well, stop, that's enough, we could then just stop and say, great, carry on as you are. You're happy with that, go with that. If he was then like, okay, I'm okay with this, can we take on more hours? Can we take on another couple of pupils? Yep, we can do that. But obviously the way you did it then, it was much harder to say to a few pupils, you need to go because you've taken on too many. And it's much easier to build it up. And I think also PDIs underestimate how physically and mentally draining the job is. It's one thing to be driving, but to actually be teaching is really mentally draining, especially at first when everything is still so new. You're not only trying to teach a lesson, you're trying to control the environment and make sure no one dies today. And in fact, what my biggest tip, whenever someone says on our PDI group, I'm going on pink, I'm starting pink next week, what do I do? What's your biggest tips? My only tip is just don't die. For your first week, you just need to survive. Just enjoy it. Don't worry about teaching as such. Just get into the flow of it. Just start teaching, relax, and you can start teaching after that. And in sort of week 2, week 3, you can start getting into it. But just don't die. That's the most important bit. But to control that is mentally draining.
Do you know, it's interesting you say that, because I can remember my first day on the job, and I went out and did my lessons, and I come home and the ex-wife asked how it was, and I kind of went, it was all right, and she's like, what were wrong? And shit, didn't like it, don't like it. And what it was I did 3 2-hour lessons. Now, there was a big block of time in between each one. I think I did like 2 hours between each lesson or something. But my first ever driving lesson, and I was crap. Of course I'm going to be crap. My first ever driving lesson, I wasn't very good. So then I've gone into my second ever driving lesson 2 hours later, thinking I'm crap. So I've been worse. And then I've gone into my third ever driving lesson 2 hours after that, feeling even worse. Do you know? And I think that if I could go back, I mean, I'm not a big one on regrets and stuff, but if I could go back, it would have been one lesson that first day. Because I could have gone home and regrouped for the next day. Whereas as it was, I had 2 hours to pity myself and think, oh God, I'm never going to do this, and then go and do a lesson and be crap.
This is also where having a supportive trainer is so important, because if I can, and it works with availability, I will always try and be there sitting in the back of that first lesson or the first 2 lessons. And sometimes PDIs kind of initially say to me, well, that's going to be really like a lot of pressure. But actually, when we've been training all the way through their kind of 40 hours up to their pink license, starting if they're on a pink, they're used to me sitting in the back. They're teaching for free. I always encourage PDIs to be teaching for free, even if it's just 1 hour a week or 1 hour every couple of weeks. Get used to teaching before you go and do it on a pink license where people are paying you and there's almost an expectation that you know what you're doing. So PDIs are used to me sitting in the back by that point. So me sitting in the back of their first couple of lessons on pink isn't unusual for them, but it gives them someone to be there for them. If I can't be in the car at that time, I will always make sure I'm available on that first day. So they can ring me, they can voice note to me, they can just brain dump or whatever they need to do. So having a supportive trainer who can pick you up, and even if it's just to listen, because I think sometimes we just need to be heard.
It's interesting you say that about that first lesson, the early lessons, doing them for free. Because I'd never have thought of that, but I do that now. I've not actually done it much this year, but like every other month I'll do a lesson for free. And I do it because I want to practice stuff. And I'll tell that learner, I want to practice this. This is a lesson for me than you. You're still going to get to drive, but I don't want the pressure of delivering you a good lesson. I want to practice this new technique or this new area, or whatever it might be. And they love it. And they're often best lessons I do. And I think back and, do you know what? I think that would have benefited me just in the weeks leading up, or even just in my first few weeks. Say to my driving school, what name? I've said it already, but whatever. Say to my driving school, I'm not starting anyone for the first month, but I'm going to deliver my mate free lesson or whatever. I think that would have been beneficial. I'm not thought of doing that. That's interesting.
I think it's undervalued. And I think sometimes PDIs don't realize it's an option. Sometimes PDIs don't realize that you can get dual controls and insurance to teach for free. Some PDIs come to us and say, I want to teach for free, but I don't know where I'd get pupils. So just quickly, if you want pupils for free, ask your friends. They might have children who are of a driving age. If you're working in a current job at the moment, you might have colleagues who have children of a driving age, neighbours, friends, family, anyone. Or even if you've got your own children who are of a similar sort of driving age, they might have friends who are driving or learning to drive. So there's always people out there. Or if I've got a PDI who wants to teach for free, they could even take one of my pupils. And my pupils always know that I train instructors, and sometimes I just loan my pupils out, and my PDIs take them out for an hour. They get to know each other quite well, so they're all comfortable with each other. The PDIs will come and observe me teaching them, and then my PDI will go and teach them as well. So there's always options. You could always borrow a pupil from another instructor or your trainer, but there are definitely options, and there are so many benefits to teaching for free. It was something I did as well when I was a PDI. And I'm glad that I did, because I made some of my biggest mistakes while I was teaching for free, because I was new and I didn't have the best of training to start with. So I was making mistakes that should never have happened, but they happened. And I'm glad that they happened while I was teaching for free and not while I was on a pink license. So, yeah.
I remember as a PDI, I did actually take the ex-wife out and we were practicing the turning the road PST. And she did one. Yes, she was role-playing the full license holder because she's a full license holder. And she did one. And I can remember just bursting out laughing. And I said, I don't think I'm good enough to fix all that. We'll have to leave that. So, yeah, I can't deal with all those faults from a full license holder. I need to move on. But yeah, I think I'm keen to ask for you on this, because I know my answer that I'm happy to share, obviously, but we've spoke a bit there about the pink license and not a pink license and franchise and not franchise. There's all these options for a PDI or someone coming into industry, I should say. Do you think it matters? Do you think one is better than the other, or do you think it's what's right for the individual coming in?
I think it's massively what's right. I think you've got to take into account your own circumstances. You've got to take into account your house, your bills, your financial situation, your kids, your partners. you've also got to take into account you and your own mental health and whether this is going to be right for you, or maybe one option might be more stressful than the other. I also think you should talk to other instructors, although I would be, I was going to say I'd be selective about who I talk to. And it's not me saying, well, you should only talk to one or two instructors specifically. I'm thinking if you went onto Facebook and you found a Facebook group for instructors and you put on there, should I join a franchise? You're going to get so many conflicting comments. But I think there are definitely pros and cons to, let's take joining a franchise, for example. There's pros and cons to doing that. But if you're in a position where, let's say, you don't have a good credit score or good financial history, where you can go and buy your own car and get insurance and everything, going on a franchise might be a good option, because then you get your car, you get your insurance, you get your dual controls and everything within that. You don't have to then worry about trying to get credit and finance for a car and doing it more independently or with a small kind of local sort of franchise or a local school. You might just simply want everything in one package. You might want to be under the name of a big brand. There's many reasons why someone might choose to go in a franchise. There's also many disadvantages to going through a franchise, and that's not why we're here to debate it. But whatever you do, look into it, research it, and do not sign anything until you are 100% confident and sure that that's what you want to do. Sleep on it, think about it. Whenever I get PDIs coming to me and they're like, yep, I'm happy to join you, I always say, go away. Go away and think about it. Come back tomorrow. Come back in a couple of days and we'll have another chat. I don't want people to make a decision there and then, because I might go home and talk to their partners and think, actually, do you know what? There's something else I didn't ask, or that didn't quite feel right. And I also know that when you're in the presence of someone, you feel obliged to make a decision there and then. But go home, think about it, sleep on it, talk to family, talk to another instructor, find someone in the industry who you can trust, whether that's a trainer or just an instructor or even another PDI, just someone that you trust who can be a listening ear and maybe give you some support or give you, get you thinking in a different way maybe.
I think franchises get quite a bad rap on social media. Like you said, you go and ask about it and you'll probably get 90% of people saying they're the work of the devil. And I'm so glad I went to a franchise when I joined. It was exactly the right thing for me, because it meant that I didn't have to worry about so much stuff. The only thing I had to focus on was me becoming an instructor. And I knew that when I qualified, I've got my car there, it's insured, and they're going to send me customers and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, okay, cool. All I need to do is get good at my job. That was it. And that's not going to be right for everyone. And that's completely fine. But it worked for me. But like you said, also I read the contract. So when I was in certain Facebook groups and I would see people from this franchise complaining about X, Y, and Z, I would ask the question, did you read that bit of the contract? And they would say no. And I'd say, well, look, I get it, but it's there. We know that.
I think another reason why franchises sometimes get a bad name is because of the quality of training. Now, most franchises work in a similar-ish way. There's part of if you're going on a pink license, for anyone who doesn't know, you have to do 40 initial hours. Those hours have to be in the presence of an ADI. Franchises will often do a bulk of those hours maybe online or through kind of Zooms or that sort of thing. Some of them do residential courses and that sort of thing. But then also, percentage of those hours have to be in-car practical training with a trainer. And whenever I hear PDIs complaining about poor training from a franchise, it's quite often the local trainer that lies the issue. So your training with a franchise is only ever going to be good as your local trainer. You could have, let's say yourself in Leeds, if you went to a big trainer, if your local trainer in Leeds is good, you're going to have a good perception of your franchise. If my trainer here in Peterborough for a franchise is really bad, I'm going to have a really bad perception of the franchise. And it's not the franchise's fault necessarily, unless they could monitor or vet their trainers more. And that's a completely another story. But that's only ever going to be as good as your local trainer. So another tip I would say for PDIs, or even if you're an AD high listening to this, and you're talking to a PDI who is asking for your support, if you're thinking about going to a franchise, ask to speak to your local trainer. Don't sign any contracts until you've spoken to your local trainer. See what they're like. See if you get on with them. See if they talk your language. See if see if they make it make sense for you, and then make a decision, because your local trainer is going to be massively a contribution to your success or not, potentially.
I think that's a good shout. And I think the other thing I would chip in with, and look, this is really difficult because I didn't do this when I first started. The idea of you sign up with your franchise, you go see your trainer, and you just do what's given to you, because why wouldn't you? You assume that's going to be the correct thing to do. So I just did that correct thing, and my trainer was pretty good. For the PSTs, obviously I didn't see him beyond that, but for the PSTs, it was really good. But when I qualified and I started sniffing around, you start seeing these other people like, oh, this guy's got a different take on this, and this person's got this different take. And I think that whether you're thinking about coming into the industry now where you've been established for 10, 20 years, there's nothing wrong with looking around and seeing for these different opinions. That's, to me, that's just, I don't know, it's just a great place to be. You might latch on to this person, and then that person takes you over here, and then that person takes you over here, and it might just be the inspiration you need, or it might be they give you a new way of thinking, or just pick up some tips or whatever. I think that it's easy to get bogged down in just, my trainer said this.
I really struggle with that phrase, and this might be diverting off a little bit, but I'm a massive believer in, and I don't mean this in a big-headed way, but I can confidently say that anything I say to a PDI or say in a training aspect, I can justify whatever I say. I can back it up. I can tell you which regulation that is, or where it says that, which publication that comes from, or why we have to do things like this. And when I hear PDI saying, well, I do this because my trainer said so, I really struggle with that, because I agree to a certain extent. If your trainer says X, Y, Z, you should be able to trust them. But at the same time, I want a PDI to be able to tell me why. Why are you doing it in a certain way? Not because your trainer said so, but why. I want the PDI to buy into it. I want the PDI to understand. I want the PDI to have that deeper knowledge, a deeper understanding, because they're going to understand it more and then be better at it if they actually, understand it.
Oh God, here you go, embarrassing example for you. I once said to a student, try and get this phrasing right, I asked them why they'd done something and they didn't know. I asked them, what should you do in this situation? Check my mirrors. Okay, why? They told me why they should do it. So why didn't you do it? I don't know. My response to that was, well, if you know what you should be doing, you know why you should be doing it, but you're just not doing it. Well, I can't help you anymore now, can I? That was something I said to a student. And I went home and I was embarrassed. And I'm like, why have I said that? And then when I thought about it, my trainer said it to me once about checking my mirrors in a new speed zone. And he said that, well, if you don't know why you're doing it, I can't help you. And it's like, it didn't feel right. And I think that's how I gauge a lot of stuff. If it doesn't feel right, check it. And that's not going to work for everything, but if it doesn't feel right, dig in a little bit further, whether it's with your trainer, whether it's with your training company, whether it's with your franchise, you could contact them and say, my trainer said this, can I check this for you? You could go onto a Facebook group, and I know people shout at you for having the audacity to ask something or not checking on Google first or whatever, but tough shit. Go on and ask him one of the nice ones. There's at least 3 out there, I'm sure. So, if you're in doubt, check it. But
I think that's a really big part of it. And you said there that, you went home and thought about that. And that's why self-reflection is a massive part of training, and self-reflection does contribute to your success as an instructor and to you qualifying. So if you hadn't have gone home and thought about that, nothing would have changed. And
I want to move on a little bit though, because one thing that we said would be interesting to speak a little bit about today was transferable skills. and what we can bring in from other job roles in the future life. So I started this in my mid-30s. I don't like having to say that. Every now and again I'll say something and I feel really old, and that was one of those times.
Shall I tell you how old I was when I started?
Oh, go on.
I was 21 when I started training.
Screw you.
Qualified at 22.
Screw you. Yeah, genuinely screw you. But so I've obviously been around a bit, and thinking about some of the not necessarily transferable skills actually, but I spent 10 years as a carpenter on my own, or self-employed, and run my own business. So there's a lot of skills that I brought in there into the business side of it. I came into that knowing some of the self-employed aspects, knowing that, hold on, I'm not going to get paid for sick leave here. I need to put something aside. I'm not getting holiday pay. I need to put something aside, having that kind of mindset. But the one that also sticks out to me is I spent a few years at McDonald's before I come here. In fact, I went from McDonald's to this job, a year in between. But it was, I'll never forget that I started off as a crew member, and then I went to a crew trainer, is what they're called. And the crew trainers basically trained the crew members and new crew members. And they had this big thing at the time, and I've no idea if it's still going or what, but I had this big thing. Let's be a crew trainer. You had to fit into 4 categories. You had to be a teacher, an expert, a coach, and a role model. And I just look at that, I think, how much of that applies to what we do? Now, don't get me wrong. When I asked some of the managers at McDonald's to explain the difference between a teacher and a coach, they couldn't. And that always made me chuckle. But it's like, look at that stuff, and it's like from working at McDonald's and from working at building sites, I'm able to take some of those skills and bring them in. Was there anything that you did in your, very, very few years before becoming an instructor that you're able to bring over?
So before I became an instructor, I had my daughter very young. I was 17 when I had my daughter. And then I trained as a nurse. So I then spent a few years training as a nurse, and I then ended up with a spinal injury, which kind of put a stop to me nursing, which then kind of prompted me to think, well, let's just give the driving instructor stuff a bash and see if it works out. But there was many skills there. I think generally quite a few nurses do become instructors. I think the NHS, I think the NHS is great, but there's issues there. But two of the probably biggest job roles that I see coming into the industry are police officers or military. I've currently got 3 police officers who are PDIs at the moment, and also teachers. And yeah, teachers seem to be a very common job for coming into the industry. Teachers are organised. Teachers are good. However, they're used to set lesson plans and, I don't know what it is. It like, who sets it? I can't remember. Is it Ofsted or someone sets it? The national curriculum, sorry. The national curriculum sets out what they have to teach and when they have to teach it and what standard everything has to be at. So then when they come into teaching, they then struggle with the lack of structure, if you like, because it's up to you as an instructor to gauge where a pupil is at and kind of set your own structure, if you like, and be a bit more flexible. So while teachers are good at teaching generally, they sometimes lack the structure side of it. Police officers, again, are really good. They're really organised. They've got that structure. But sometimes they come across a little too, not forceful, not aggressive, not... I don't know what word I'm looking for.
Assertive?
Yeah, maybe that.
Dominant?
Yeah, dominant. They have quite a dominant presence in the car. That authority kind of, yeah. So that then can trip them up a little bit. There's definitely pros and cons to having any job, but there's always something within a job that you can bring in. Whether, like you say, it's from working at McDonald's up to being a police officer, being a trainer or a teacher in another role. It's really interesting when you actually look at the Part 3 form, or also the standards check form, it's the same form. The 17 competencies that you have to tick and be assessed on, not one of them mentions driving. there is no competency that actually says anything about driving or being an instructor. They're all about training and teaching. So Lou always said that you should be able to take that Part 3 form or that standards check form to any training profession, whether it's a teacher, whether it's, I think Lou said about taking it to her son's diving coach. And you should be able to assess them against those 17 competencies and get a good measure of where they are. It's not just related to driving. So any sort of training or teaching experience you already have definitely can be a transferable skill that you can bring in.
Speaking of training, you started training PDIs like the day after you qualified. How dare you? I'm presuming that how dare you was the response you got, actually.
Pretty much. I think maybe locally, more so locally, but maybe also online as well. Naturally, I fell into teaching fairly easily once Lou make it make sense for me. And I then passed with a really good score. And I did moving off and stopping with a test-ready pupil and got a pretty solid grade A. And when that was then put on social media, I had quite a few other PDIs saying, how did you do that? Can you help me? What advice would you give? And naturally, I just gave some advice, gave some support. And very quickly, that kind of snowballed into people saying, can you come and watch my lessons? Can you come and do this? Can you help me? And actually, I loved that role. I loved that aspect and I loved that side of it. So I didn't ever shy away from it. It wasn't intentional. I always wanted to be a trainer. I think that was always a long-term goal, maybe in a couple of years, but naturally happened. And Lou supported me. Like I said, Lou took me under her wing right from the beginning as a PDI. And I said to Lou, when I had PDIs asking me for advice, I said, I'm not a trainer. And Lou just said, don't call yourself one then. She said, you can be a coach, you can be a mentor, you can be a supporter. You don't have to call yourself a trainer. And it honestly took me about 2 years to call myself a trainer. Especially when I passed my first standards check. My first standards check was 11 months after I passed in Part 3. And especially until I'd done my standards check, I really didn't like calling myself a trainer. I didn't feel like I deserved that title or earned that title. But I happily supported PDIs from very early on. And like you say, there were definitely some raised eyebrows, especially the fact that I was already maybe under the spotlight because I had qualified at the age of 22. And more so now, there are a lot of young PDIs coming into the industry. But at the time, like 8 years ago, there weren't many young PDIs, which I'm glad there's more young PDIs now. I definitely think it's a good job to get into. But it wasn't, there's a few raised eyebrows, shall we say.
It's interesting, that the whole trainer concept and like you said there about Lou saying, don't call yourself a trainer. Still don't know if I'll ever go down that route. At the minute, like the idea of training in the traditional sense, kind of what you do, take someone as a PDI and train them up to become an ADI. That doesn't interest me. Now that might change, change your mind every day on stuff, but
why doesn't it interest you?
Do you know what? I don't know. This is something I think about a lot, and I don't know why it doesn't appeal to me. And I realize that's not a great answer, but it just doesn't. Maybe it's not that doesn't appeal to me. It's more that other things excite me more. So what I do, for example, in the membership, where I have these open Zoom rooms where people come along, I love that because I never know what I'm going to get asked. Now, I know that applies to being a trainer as well, but there's no structure to it. And I like that informality, that lack of structure. Whereas if I took someone from day one, and then there has to be some kind of structure there. There has to be some kind of planning going on. But what I like is the dipping in and out. I think that's what I'm enjoying at the minute. So maybe that'll change at some point. Maybe I'll want to get a bit more involved in an individual's journey rather than chipping into an individual's journey. But I think the reason I'm saying that is just to go back to what we said earlier. It's each to their own. There'll be some people that when they qualify, they wouldn't dream of working with other PDIs, because I wouldn't have done. I'd have been like, no, just I need to get myself sorted first. Somehow I've passed this thing and I need to get remotely good. That would have been my mind. I would never have done what you did, but you probably would never have done what I did. And look at the two different takes we have to the training aspect. You're heavily involved with PDIs. You're heavily involved like in-car training, all the, what I call the nitty-gritty of it. I like the peripheral stuff. I think that, and this is what kind of I wanted to bring into the industry as well a little bit, this idea that you don't just have to do the well-trodden path. You don't just have to qualify, become a trainer, start a driving school. There's like all these other different avenues we can do. And I think it's great seeing that. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I agree. And I think you are training, like maybe not in a traditional sense, but you are offering a training service, if you like, in some aspect. Even if you're not directly giving that training, even if you are bringing on experts and other people who are, giving their knowledge and thoughts, you're providing that platform where people can come to you and get information and supports. And I know that if a PDI did message you and ask for support or advice, you'd give it, or you would say, look, I don't know the answer, but I know someone who does, and this is where you can find them.
I'm really glad you've said that. I think that's a good way of phrasing it. I do provide training. I just don't consider myself a traditional trainer. I think that's a really good way of putting it. Is there anything else you want to touch on from today around this idea of entering the industry?
I think if I had to kind of leave some parting words, I suppose, for this kind of topic, it wouldn't be to the PDIs directly. I think I would want to say to the ADIs and potentially PDIs who are currently out there is that if you are talking to PDIs or if you're supporting someone, I'm making it not make sense.
I think you make more sense than you think you do.
Sometimes I do listen back to myself and think, actually, that did make sense. But
yeah, because I was getting it.
I wasn't.
You just ruined the NZ podcast. Final words for the episode. Fire away.
Fuck it. I think if I had to leave some final words for this kind of topic and subject that we're on, it wouldn't actually be directed to the PDIs. I think it would be more directed to the ADIs. And that would be that if you see a PDI in need or struggling or wanting support, or even if you saw a PDI at the test centre, just go and talk to them. Just go and say how you're getting on. And I can guarantee they will chew your ear off and they will have something to say. And you don't have to be a trainer. You don't have to be anything other than you just have to listen. That's all PDIs want, is to be heard, to have their feelings validated, to feel supported. And you know what? From that interaction, they might come to you for training. They might come and ask you for more support or ask more questions. I would say, yeah, my last thoughts would be to ADIs to go and support the PDIs. You don't have to be a trainer. Just go and support them. Be a listening ear and keep them on the right path. You don't have to know all the answers. They can be directed to other trainers or other places where they can get answers. They just need to be heard.
I like it. Do you want to take a moment to tell people where they can find you at Go Green?
I think, yeah, PDIs can find us at gogreen.drivinginstructortraining.co.uk. We also have ADI content and also are bringing out trainer content. But I also would like to take the opportunity to mention Lou's PDI group. So just for those who aren't aware, Lou's PDI group was set up by Lou herself. In fact, I was one of the first members of her group, and that was when I first met Lou. And she messaged me out of the blue. I didn't even know who she was. And she said, I'm starting a group. Would you like to join it? And I was just like, who on earth are you? And I didn't know who she was. And she started a PDI group, and it was designed to be a safe place for PDIs. And what 9 years later, we now have 2,500 PDIs, and it's just for PDIs. We don't have ADIs in there. When you qualify, you get kicked out into our green group. But it's a safe space. It's designed where we can give you that support. It doesn't matter who you're training with. We're not biased. We don't really promote go green in there. It's just for PDIs to get support from one another and ourselves, knowing that, yeah, you've got that support and you've got that safe place to ask questions, because we also know that some bigger social media groups can be a little bit chaotic and a little bit contradictory, maybe. And like I said earlier, we can justify what we say. If a PDI came to me and said, "Why did you say that? Show me where it says that," I can show you. So if you're a PDI, you're more than welcome to join us in Lou's PDI group on Facebook.
Links will be in the show notes for anyone listening that wants to find that or find more from Go Green. We can find it in there. But yeah, big thank you for joining me on this episode, Laura, as always.
Thank you. It's been great.
So big thank you again to Laura Morris for joining me on this episode and for doing the whole thing. You know, I love this, recording all these episodes. Particularly enjoyed reminiscing a little bit today about how I got into the industry. And I hadn't realised that me and Laura had come in at pretty much the same time. And to be fair, they're very, very different routes we've taken. So yeah, again, as always, I'd love to hear your feedback, not just on this episode, but overall on this whole In Conversation With series. And who would you like to hear an In Conversation With series in going forward? But I also want to point in the direction of the Instructor Podcast Premium. So over there, there's a whole host of content to help you become a better driving instructor and run a better driving school, including a brand new series we started up recently with Dan Hill of My Drive Time, which we have imaginatively and creatively named My Dan Time. Now, Dan used to write a lot of articles for Intelligent Instructor and other places as well. And what he's done is he's dived back into his catalogue of stuff, pulled out some interesting ones, and we're essentially doing a bit of a deep dive into the articles he's written. Great feedback so far, loving what Dan's doing, and I'm loving being able to pick his brain around the delicate business side, because I think sometimes I'm guilty of letting the emotion override stuff, and Dan's very business-minded, so it's quite interesting having those conversations. So again, the best way to find out more is www.theinstructorpodcast.com. You can find out loads of information over there, or you can sign up for a 3 weeks trial, so there's no obligation to stay. You can sign up, have a look, see if there's anything you like, which I'm sure there will be. And a word of warning, most people that sign up for a free trial stay, so just a word of warning for you there. Or if you want to go to our top tier, where you get all the regular content, plus all the interactive stuff like open Zoom rooms, Ask Me Anything, the option to come on board and watch podcasts being recorded live, ask questions, all that kind of stuff, you can sign up to that as well. There's even discounts for annual memberships, so you get a 16% discount if you sign up to an annual membership. Again, I want to give a shout out to Stuart Lockery of Bright Coaching for continuing to support the Instructor Podcast. Make sure that you're checking out everything they have to offer at brightcoaching.net. Make sure you're signing up to the newsletter so whenever anything new comes out, because they have released a few new products recently, including the new online version of their accredited qualification in coaching, behavioural change and driver psychology. The best way to keep up to date with that, head to the website, or you can find them at the trade stand at the Expo on September the 29th. But now, let's just keep raising standards.
The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.
Phil Cowley refers to the Instructor Podcast Premium as Hardcore CPD. If you want to get hardcore, www.theinstructorpodcast.com.